Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. Recently there was a pretty big interview between Soloque, who is a game designer for World of Warcraft right now, particularly in charge of the PvP side of the game, and Vinruki over on Twitch. After that interview, we got a lot of insight in terms of what Blizzard wants to do with Shadowlands PvP, particularly going into patch 9.1. Down in the description, I'm gonna have the link for Vinruki and the interview. I feel like you guys should definitely check it out. It's very insightful just being able to hear the actual conversation, the back and forth, because everything we're going to talk about here is mostly just bullet points, but the actual interaction itself, I think it just gives you a little bit more insight in terms of how the developers communicate with the PvP community. But let's take a look at some of the topics that were covered within the PvP side of things, and I want to give you guys my thoughts on everything it has to do, because on this channel we do quite a bit of PvP. First of all, to start talking about patch 9.1 in terms of some of the biggest changes that have been coming out, and let's just go over that very quickly. Patch 9.1 is doing a pretty big overhaul of the honor talents. A lot of these honor talents are actually looking really good. One of the things that Soloque mentioned in the interview is how they're able to create unique and interesting mechanics within PvP that normally wouldn't be done within dungeons and raids, like classes have an area of denial. We've seen stuff like that from frost mages with their ice wall, or maybe elemental shamans with the static totem, or warlocks just being able to port the whole enemy team towards the gateway. Personally, I feel that they've had actually a lot of cool new honor talents added for classes. They cycled out a lot of the bad ones and updated honor talents in order to make them a little bit more competitive, to try to make honor talents not as required or necessary. And any of the necessary honor talents that feel like everybody has to play in every single matchup, they just kind of gave it and baked it into the specs as well. Let's first talk about gearing in Shadowlands, because they believe that it started out really well. And when everybody started out at the starting line in 9.0, just trying to get their honor gear, conquest gear, it was awesome. Everybody were trying to grind their gear, people were trying to grind their rating, people were doing RBGs, 3v3s, 2v2s, and they still are doing them right now, but the gear disparity over time did grow. For players that are coming into the middle of the season to try to get into 2v2s to grind gear, you will have players with full honor gear of 195 item level facing against players that are like 230 from RBG gear. So players would go into RBGs, grind that rating there, get like 2100, and then start doing 2v2s, and they had a massive gear advantage and just stomping over players that are just getting into the game. It's funny because Soloque actually said that 2v2s is the most popular bracket, and they saw a lot of that happening, so they want to address that in the future. One of the things they're going to be doing for patch 9.1 is, well, in 9.1 we're going to be back at that starting line. We're all going to be gearing our characters. It's going to be like a big refresher. So at the very beginning of the season, that won't really be an issue in terms of being behind on gear. With the new PvP gear scaling, where gear scales within PvP situations, you will need the new honor gear as well as the conquest gear, and everybody's going to be starting at the same starting line. But later down the season, some players are going to be behind on Conquest, maybe they don't have the rating, maybe they're just joining the season halfway through, or you're trying to get some ults up and running and geared for PvP. They do want to address that with a 9.1.5 patch, which a 0.5 patch usually drops somewhere in the middle of a patch, so a 9.1.5 should happen somewhere in the middle of the PvP season, where they want to add some new incentives and help players out to get the gear a little bit quicker. They said that they don't want to reduce the amount of Conquest needed to buy the gear, but rather give you more Conquest so that you still feel like you earned the gear. As of right now, we don't really know what that will look like, but I guess we'll have to wait until patch 9.1.5, but I think it's at least a good step forward to try to adjust when you see a PvP gear discrepancy. If there's any issues on the horizon in a 0.5 patch, it might be a good idea to address any of the obvious issues. They also talked about the healing and the amount of healing classes have in the game, particularly those classes that are hybrids or have certain soul binds or conduits that just give free big bursts of heals just for getting hit by an enemy. And some of those hybrid classes, for example, like a Retribution Paladin is a great one. Their Shield of Vengeance isn't a great defensive, but part of the defensive toolkit ends up being the fact that they have to heal themselves in order to survive the damage that's outgoing. And the healing is really high. So they want to address some of that in terms of classes just being able to, or having to, rely on raw healing as part of their defensive toolkit. They also don't like situations where if your healer on your team gets crowd controlled and the Retribution Paladin just starts Word of Glorying everybody and the whole team is topped off and is doing fine, that's not what they want to see in the future either. Certain conduits, certain soul binds also provide huge amounts of boost of healing, so it looks like Blizzard is going to be going aggressively after all of these elements. We don't really know what they're going to be able to give these classes back, if they're going to be taking away their healing. They would need to do something to make these classes a little bit less squishy generally in PvP. Speaking about healing, let's talk about damage, the counterpoint of this. They feel like that too many classes have too many cooldowns that they haven't to overlap and try to go for the big one-shot cooldowns and buttons, and all that off healing ends up kind of countering it. Like a fire mage will go for full rune of power, combustion, full GPI into a meteor, and a druid will just pop in a bear form, press enrage regeneration, just heal to full, countering all this unholy damage with unholy amount of healing. And then the games end up being very much CD based. You're just waiting for your cooldowns to come back until you can use them again, and hopefully the enemy team won't have those CDs. They also don't like the idea that too many classes are having to take a bunch of different cooldowns, slap them together into this big unholy burst, and they kind of want to have classes to have maybe 2-minute cooldowns, 3-minute cooldowns, but not like a massive amount of overlap in them. Maybe they're talking about the Seraphim for Retribution Paladins together with Final Rec, together with Wings, together with Ashen, and then try to go for as many Templar's Verdicts as you can during that window. Maybe that's what they're alluding to. But on the flip side, they said, while the cooldowns, they don't want them to be like, you know, super reliant on cooldowns where the game slows down if those cooldowns are not up. They want to buff the filler damage of classes. So for example, if Paladin does more damage while their wings are down, that's something that could be considered going forward. So classes can actually make some successful plays. And a lot of classes have been buffed, like Frost Mages and Frostbolts, that can actually make some really beefy bursts without having full cooldowns available. And with some cross CC, you can actually make an opening to create a kill window without always needing cooldowns as well. To quote Halinka, he said, "People gotta die." That's the main concern in terms of PvP combat. Players eventually have to die. They don't want to see 10-minute long games. They'd rather see like 3-minute, 4-minute games, and they would rather have the games go by faster. That's why they've also been adding a lot of more offensive utilities for healers and other classes to help create the windows. They kind of looking at the game to be more lethal rather than more defensive, and they want to reward more aggressive plays rather than more defensive plays going forward. If you're someone who's not a huge fan of the bursty gameplay, it does seem like Blizzard wants to trim a little bit on the insane bursts that classes have. They want them to have powerful cooldowns and maybe even more damage as sustained damage to create those kill windows more often, but also they're trying not to make the game super bunkered down where you can just live for minutes and minutes on end. I don't think they're trying to make classes even burstier, but they are trying to make the game feel more lethal through stronger sustained damage, what it sounds like, and more aggressive honor talent choices going forward. Let's also talk about some of the different game modes they're suggesting, like solo queue. They have heard players' concerns in terms of solo queue. Would it be nice to just be able to queue arenas without having to look for pugs and LFG? You just press a button and you get thrown into matchmaking like Overwatch or League of Legends. But the way that they mentioned it is there's some concerns. First of all, they are not really happy about the idea, like, let's say 2 rogues that queue in the arena, one rogue gets Rogue Mage Druid, and the other rogue gets Rogue Guardian Druid. That was the exact example that was kind of brought up on the stream. The fears are the game is way too comp based, and it's not like League of Legends match or an Overwatch match where you can adjust your class on the fly. You kind of queue at random, and some players could particularly get screwed by the system. I agree with the general concept of if you're going to get as many bad matchups as you're going to get as many good ones, and it all depends how you end up playing in the good matchups and how well you play in the bad ones. If you win all your good matchups and you don't lose every single one of your matchups, you'll still end up going up in rating. There is always potential in these situations to get insanely bad RNG match after match after match, or insanely amazing RNG over and over and over. So I understand why Blizzard and Halinka aren't sure about doing this, but let's be honest, the community wants this. If players want it, why don't you just give it to them? And they actually said they might want to try this out in like a brawl format, and I really think they should. If they are going to be doing this in a brawl format to test this, I really do think they need to bring basically the brawl as a 3v3 bracket where you randomly queue with players and actually have a matchmaking system with current rating attached to it, and even let people earn conquest. Brawls are interesting ways for Blizzard to find different game modes for players to play, and if they added like a real matchmaking brawl in terms of the solo queue and what it's supposed to look like, just let it be complete pandemonium. Whatever happens, happens. Just throw it out for players and then see what you get from it. Just take a lot of the feedback from players actually trying this. If it ends up being a successful system, just add it into the game at that point. If it doesn't end up being successful, well, then it just doesn't work for World of Warcraft. There's no harm in trying, and I'm glad that at least they're considering of putting it as a brawl mode, and I really do hope they add a matchmaking system behind it. They also talked about potentially 6v6 becoming a real game mode with its own BGs, because I like the idea behind it, and I really think they should consider it. I think it would be a really cool idea. 6v6 format for Battlegrounds seems more tense than a full 10-man RBG. I think could be a really interesting idea going forward. But just to keep this video short, I'm gonna end it right here. Let me know what you guys thought about some of the things from the interview. What part were your favorite? Let me know your thoughts just down in the comments, and if you want to hit me up on Discord, link down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you guys in the next one.